Join me to paint a beautiful bird in a serene winter scene using watercolors. The bird's body is shaped like capital letter D. With just few little adjustments, you can create the shape of the bird. The first step in this painting process is to wet the background. Usually we wet the background with clear water, but this time we will use a light wash with a mix of ivory black and cobalt blue. I'm using a mop brush to create the light wash, but you can use a flat brush if that's what you have. Next, I switch to a size 8 round brush to carefully paint around the bird, making sure not to go inside the bird's outline. I'm mixing cobalt blue with ivory black, and you can see the consistency of the pigment on my palette. I'm applying this mixture below the bird's cage, and then I'm going to tilt the board to let the pigment flow. Since we wet the paper while doing the light wash, the pigment will spread and create a background that looks like there are some trees in the distance. I left some areas untouched at the top of the painting because I want them to represent the sky. Next, I want to share a new technique that will help you to create a snow-covered branch for the bird to perch on. For this, I dip a woolen thread in water and wipe off the excess water with my finger and then place it on the wet paint. The water on the thread pulls the pigment out, creating a texture that resembles a snow-covered branch. I press the thread onto the paper using the end of the brush handle to make sure that the thread makes good contact with the paper. Then with a wet brush, I gently touch the woolen thread. The woolen thread absorbs the water from the brush, pulling even more pigment out of its place. I will go into more detail about this technique at the end of the video, so be sure to stick around to fully understand it. If you noticed, I also sprinkled a bit of salt onto the wet paint earlier to add extra texture. Now I'm going to let the paper dry completely. Now the paper is completely dry. The area underneath the thread is still a bit damp. I remove that blue pigment that is collected under the thread by using a clean damp brush. At one particular point on the branch, the pigment hasn't moved out of its place. For that area, I mix orange with cobalt blue to create a brown shade, which I will use to paint the spot that isn't covered in snow. I'm making adjustments to ensure it looks just right in this painting. Next, we are going to paint the bird using the wet on wet technique. First, I'm applying Naples yellow, which is then followed by an indigo shade created by mixing ivory black and cobalt blue. The indigo shade will be used to paint the feathers, tail, and the area near the bird's head. Next, I'm mixing ivory black and cobalt blue to create a thick, dark pigment which I use to paint the tail, feathers, head, and beak of the bird. I'm using a dark brown pigment created by mixing orange with cobalt blue to paint the bird's foot. We have reached the final part of this painting. Next, we will see how to use the thread technique. First, wet the paper and then apply the pigment. Make sure there is not too much watercolor pigment on the paper. If you notice excess pigment, tilt the board and wipe it off. Now dip the thread in water and gently wipe off the excess water using your fingers. Then place the thread onto the wet paper. The wet thread will pull the pigment out of its place. Use the end of your brush handle to ensure the thread makes good contact with the wet paint. Next, with a wet brush, allow the thread to absorb water from the brush, pulling even more pigment out of its place. This will create a cauliflower effect in the area where the wet thread is placed. When the paper is completely dry, remove the thread. The pigment underneath it will still be wet. You can clean it up with a damp brush. This technique helps to create a beautiful snow-covered branch. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I will see you in next video. Until then, take care and bye bye from Prema.